You'd think a heist takes brains, planning, maybe even a little genius. But some criminals plan for months and still fail in the dumbest way possible. Imagine robbing a bank while wearing your work uniform with your real name tag still on. Or breaking into someone's house, stealing their stuff, and then logging into Facebook on their computer and forgetting to log out. These aren't just crimes, they're epic fails. Today, we're counting down the 7 dumbest heists in American history, where the criminals made it way too easy for the cops. If you enjoy true crime stories, make sure to like, subscribe to this channel for more. We have number 7. Albert Bailey, the call-ahead bank robber. In 2010, Albert Bailey, a 27-year-old man from Bridgeport, Connecticut, committed one of the most bizarre and ultimately disastrous bank robberies in American history. What made this robbery unforgettable? Bailey called the bank ahead of time, as if he was ordering takeout. Yes, you read that right. Bailey phoned People's United Bank at approximately 11:30 a.m. and casually told the employee that he would be arriving shortly to rob the place. He didn't disguise his voice, nor did he attempt to hide his identity. He simply told them, "Get the money ready." Incredibly, Bailey didn't think twice about the consequences of his actions. Alongside him was his 16-year-old accomplice, who followed him into the bank. The teenager handed the teller a demand note, requesting $100,000 in cash. At that point, Bailey's plan already began to unravel. The teller, knowing something was off, complied with the demand but only handed over $900, mostly in small bills. Bailey and his accomplice walked out of the bank with what they thought was their prize, heading straight for their getaway car. But by this point, the bank had already alerted the authorities. As they exited the bank, police were waiting outside, and before they could get far, both men were arrested. It was a total failure. No getaway, no escape. Bailey, who was already on probation for a previous robbery, made the same mistake twice. His attempt to make a robbery easy by calling ahead only ensured his capture. Bailey was charged with first-degree robbery and conspiracy to commit robbery, and he was sentenced to several years in prison. His failure wasn't just in the robbery itself, but in his complete disregard for the basics of pulling off a successful crime. We have number 6. Derek Mosley robbed a gun store with a baseball bat. In 2013, Derek Mosley from Portland, Oregon, made one of the most ill-conceived decisions in the history of robberies. His plan? To rob a gun store with a baseball bat. Yes, you read that correctly. A baseball bat. On the afternoon of April 10, 2013, Mosley entered Keith's Sporting Goods, a store known for selling hunting supplies, firearms, and other outdoor gear. Instead of bringing a weapon that could potentially help him in a robbery, Mosley carried a baseball bat, an object clearly ill-suited for the crime he intended to commit. Mosley smashed the glass display cases in an attempt to steal a firearm. However, as soon as he tried to grab one of the guns, the store owner, Keith G. McDonald, who was armed himself, immediately responded. With quick thinking and clear preparedness, McDonald drew his own weapon and aimed it directly at Mosley. At this point, Mosley's plans came crashing down. The man who had walked in looking to make an easy theft was now confronted by someone far more prepared for violence. Mosley, realizing that his baseball bat wasn't going to help him against a gun, dropped it immediately. He was then held at gunpoint by McDonald until police arrived on the scene. Why did Mosley think he could rob a gun store with a bat? The entire plan was absurd. A baseball bat, which could barely cause harm to an unarmed person, would certainly do nothing against someone armed with a gun. Did Mosley think he could intimidate the store owner into submission? Or did he seriously underestimate how prepared the staff would be in such a setting? It's hard to understand what led to this ridiculous decision. When the police arrived, Mosley was arrested without incident. He was charged with first-degree robbery and was later convicted, receiving a sentence of several years in prison. His attempt to rob a place that sold weapons, using an object with no real power in comparison to firearms, only showcased his severe lack of planning, foresight, and understanding of what he was getting himself into. The ridiculousness of this robbery made it a story that captured public attention. Robbing a gun store without a gun? It's the definition of poor planning and a stark reminder that some criminals make their jobs far more difficult than they need to. We have number 5. MacArthur Wheeler, lemon juice as invisible ink disguise. In 1995, MacArthur Wheeler from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, became infamous for a criminal decision that would not only lead to his capture but also to the creation of a psychological phenomenon. What did he do? Wheeler tried to use lemon juice as a disguise to become invisible to security cameras. It all started on April 28, 1995, when Wheeler walked into two separate banks in Pittsburgh. His plan seemed simple: commit a robbery without being caught. But instead of using a mask, makeup, or anything that might have concealed his identity, Wheeler did something entirely bizarre. He believed that by rubbing lemon juice on his face, he would somehow make himself invisible to security cameras. Yes, lemon juice. Why did he think this? It's unclear whether Wheeler thought the acidic juice would erase his facial features or simply blur his image enough to avoid detection. Regardless, his logic was drastically flawed. Wheeler didn't even bother to wear a disguise. He entered the banks barefaced, fully confident that the lemon juice would protect him from being identified. After robbing two banks, Wheeler walked out with the stolen money, completely unaware that his face, covered in lemon juice, was clearly captured on security footage. As soon as the images were broadcast on the news, the public saw him in all his glory, the man who thought he was invisible but had no idea he was actually making himself even more identifiable. Not long after, Wheeler was quickly arrested. He hadn't even taken basic precautions, such as wearing a hat or glasses to cover his face. Instead, he had relied on the belief that lemon juice could somehow defy the technology of the security cameras. In the end, Wheeler's lack of understanding about how security systems worked was his downfall. Wheeler's case became a cautionary tale about overconfidence and the dangers of underestimating common sense. His ridiculous belief that lemon juice could make him invisible is not only laughable in hindsight but also significant in psychology. Wheeler was convicted of armed robbery and sentenced to a lengthy prison term. His crime didn't just land him behind bars, it also provided a key lesson in the importance of basic knowledge and realistic thinking, especially when it comes to criminal activity. We have number 4. Nicholas Wigg forgot to log out of Facebook during burglary. In June 2014, Nicholas Wigg, a 26-year-old man from South St. Paul, Minnesota, committed a burglary that could have gone unnoticed if not for one astonishingly careless mistake. While breaking into a home, Wigg took the opportunity to log into his Facebook account on the victim's computer. But what sealed his fate was what he didn't do. He forgot to log out. Wigg had broken into the home and stolen personal belongings, including credit cards and cash. But somewhere during the burglary, he made himself comfortable enough to hop on the victim's computer and check social media. It's unclear why he did it: boredom, overconfidence, or sheer thoughtlessness. But the consequences were immediate. When the homeowner returned, he discovered signs of the break-in and noticed his computer had been used. Still open on the screen was Nicholas Wigg's Facebook profile, fully logged in and displaying his name and photos. It was as if Wigg had left a digital fingerprint, a confession without words. Rather than panic, the homeowner decided to play along. He posted a message on Wigg's Facebook page, pretending to be casual and non-confrontational. The two eventually exchanged text messages, and incredibly, Wigg agreed to meet up to retrieve some clothing he had left at the crime scene. What happened next was predictable. The homeowner tipped off the police, who were already well aware of Wigg's identity thanks to the Facebook profile. When Wigg showed up for the meeting, officers were waiting to arrest him. He was taken into custody without incident. Wigg was later charged with felony burglary, and under Minnesota law, he faced up to 10 years in prison and a $20,000 fine. His digital recklessness turned a quiet burglary into a headline-making story of modern stupidity. This case became a warning about how technology can quickly backfire, especially when criminals forget the basics, like logging out. Wigg's mistake wasn't just careless, it was completely avoidable, and it made the job of law enforcement far too easy. We have number 3. Joshua Ray Murphy left wallet and ID at crime scene. In the early hours of June 2015, 25-year-old Joshua Ray Murphy made a decision that would cost him his freedom. He attempted to burglarize a home in Lincolnton, North Carolina, likely expecting a clean getaway. But instead of escaping with valuables and anonymity, he left behind the most incriminating piece of evidence possible: his own wallet. Murphy had quietly broken into the residence, targeting electronics, credit cards, and other items of value. But before he could complete the robbery, he was startled, possibly by a noise or the homeowner themselves, and bolted from the scene in a rush. In his panic, he dropped his wallet, which contained his full ID and personal details. It was the kind of blunder law enforcement dreams of. When the homeowner discovered the break-in and called police, they also turned over the wallet that had been left on the property. Detectives had everything they needed: a name, an address, and even a photo. There was no need for fingerprints, surveillance footage, or lengthy investigations. Murphy had essentially handed the case to police on a silver platter. Law enforcement officers located and arrested Murphy soon after. He didn't put up a fight. There was little room to deny the charges when your government-issued ID is found at the scene of the crime. Murphy was charged with several felonies, including breaking and entering, larceny, and possession of stolen goods. Given the straightforward nature of the evidence, the case was quickly processed. This is the kind of mistake that raises eyebrows, even among seasoned detectives. Leaving behind your wallet during a robbery isn't just careless. It's evidence of poor planning, desperation, or both. In any case, it made Murphy one of the easiest arrests of the year. We have number 2. Peter Addison wrote his name at the crime scene. In October 2007, a children's activity center in Cheshire, England, was left in ruins after a senseless act of vandalism. The culprits had broken in, trashed the property, and caused thousands of pounds of damage. But amidst the chaos, one detail stood out to investigators, a piece of graffiti that made this case unusually simple to solve. Scrawled on one of the walls in bold letters were the words, "Peter Addison was here." That name wasn't a joke or a decoy, it was real. Peter Addison, just 18 years old at the time, had proudly signed his own crime scene. Along with an accomplice, Mark Ridgway, he had broken into the Bosley Cloud Adventure Training Center, which was used by youth groups and schools. The pair smashed windows, overturned furniture, sprayed fire extinguishers, and scribbled graffiti throughout the building. But what set this case apart wasn't the damage, it was the extraordinary level of self-incrimination. By literally writing his name on the wall, Addison had provided police with a direct lead. And sure enough, when officers looked into the name, it didn't take long to track him down. Addison and Ridgway were arrested and readily admitted to the crime in court. They were charged with burglary and criminal damage, and both received community service sentences and fines for the destruction they caused. Even the investigating officer remarked on the absurdity of the case, stating that they couldn't recall a time when a suspect had made their own identification so easy. It was the equivalent of leaving behind a signed confession, but with spray paint. This wasn't just a dumb mistake, it was a blatant reminder of how arrogance and immaturity often lead to criminals outing themselves without even realizing it. We have number 1. Michael Harrell used a note with his name on it. In 2019, Michael Harrell from Cleveland, Ohio, pulled off one of the most blatantly careless crimes imaginable. He walked into a local bank, approached the teller, and handed over a robbery note demanding money. The problem? The note was written on the back of a document from the Ohio Bureau of Motor Vehicles, BMV, a document that contained his full name and address. It's hard to imagine a more obvious mistake when committing a crime, but that's exactly what Harrell did. Instead of writing the robbery note on a blank piece of paper, he used a BMV document, completely unaware that it contained all his personal details. So not only did he commit the crime, but he practically handed over his business card to the authorities. After Harrell handed the note to the teller, the bank staff followed the standard procedure. They handed over the money and activated the silent alarm. By the time Harrell walked out of the bank, police were already on their way. But the real kicker came when they reviewed the robbery note. Right there in bold print was Michael Harrell's name and address. How could Harrell be so careless? Was he in such a rush that he didn't realize the piece of paper he was using had a direct link to him? Did he not understand the importance of leaving behind no trace? His note not only implicated him in the crime, but it made the police's job practically too easy. Days later, authorities tracked him down to his home address, which was conveniently listed on the back of the note. Harrell was arrested without much trouble, and the case was quickly solved thanks to his own oversight. The absurdity of the situation wasn't lost on the public or the police. Harrell essentially gave the cops a roadmap to his door, making his capture inevitable. In a way, it was almost as though he had deliberately handed over the evidence. He wasn't just leaving behind a clue, he handed over the most direct form of identification possible. Harrell's case became an example of how easy it is to make a mistake when you don't pay attention to the details. What could have been a relatively simple heist turned into a textbook example of criminal carelessness. His arrest was just days after the robbery, and his error made the entire process of solving the case painfully straightforward. These were some of the dumbest heists in American history, proof that crime and carelessness never mix. For more interesting true crime stories like this, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to this channel. And as always, stay safe, stay aware, and I'll see you in the next one.